I personally find dark skin so beautiful. I always wanted to be darker, and like I'll literally be tanning on holiday like a white person trying to get dark.
See, that's so crazy because I remember growing up and being like scared of the sun.
Yeah, you get lit.
Can't get too dark because then you're gonna get like cussed out by these black boys.
That's crazy, and the fact that it's black boys as well, like it's insane.
I'm Serena.
I'm Naima.
I'm Simia.
I'm Shreya.
And this is Untold.
So obviously we've got another guest on this week who is Louise, and we were fortunate enough to kind of come across Louise through social media, just collaborating through just the fact that we have similar interests, and we thought it'd be really good just to dig a little bit deeper and just have a conversation and get to know Louise more and like what she's pursuing, because I think it really aligns with what we're about anyway as a brand and a platform. So I'm super excited for this interview / conversation / open discussion. And so we'll get started. We have a few questions and I think it's going to be really great.
Cool. I'm looking forward to it.
Really excited. Thank you so much for being here once again, and like, you know, at any point just interject.
Yeah, no problem. Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm excited.
Yeah. So our first question is basically like if you could just tell us about yourself and like your upbringing, background and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so as I said, my name's Louise. I grew up in the East Midlands, so Lincolnshire, and a small town near Peterborough called Stamford. So I was born and raised essentially in Peterborough, well, Stamford. My mum's side of the family are originally from Guyana, which is in South America. It's on mainland South America, but it's culturally considered more Caribbean. And then my dad is actually, and his side of the family, all from Scotland. So I'm half Scottish, half Guyanese. I went to school in Stamford and then went to Newcastle University and studied law. I did that for 3 years, graduated in 2016, which seems so long ago now. I feel like I'm not old enough to have graduated that long ago. And then I actually did 2 years working on a graduate scheme at HSBC in banking, so nothing to do with law. So I did that for 2 years based in the Canary Wharf office, you know, that big tall one. So that was pretty cool. I essentially did that because I wanted to make sure that law was something I definitely wanted to go into. And it's so expensive to do the next stage, which is essentially the bar course. If you want to become a barrister, that is. So I saved it with money to try and fund myself through that, and then got a bit of a scholarship. So I did the bar course and finished that last July. So I've been called to the bar. I've got the wig and everything.
Wow.
It looks a bit ridiculous, but I'll have to wear it at some point. And yeah, so then for the last year, I've had a year off before I start my like in-office training, which is called pupillage for barristers, but for solicitors it's called a training contract. So it's essentially the equivalent. I was meant to start that at the end of September, but coronavirus has had other ideas. So that's now starting next April. So I've had like a year off, and I went to do a few months in America volunteering on death row cases as a volunteer intern. And then I'm now working as a paralegal on a public inquiry here in the UK. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
Wow.
That's awesome. You've done so much.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I might be slightly older than you guys. As you can see, I've got like a happy birthday band. I've just turned 25, so. What's life? What's life crisis is pending.
You've done so much. Well, I'm just trying to I was counting the years. I said, wow.
Yeah.
So much has been done.
And when you say it, it sounds, but I have had time to like chill and like do normal stuff. I've just constantly been studying.
You have had a balance.
Yeah, definitely.
Amazing. Well, obviously, like the way that we came across you was through Instagram, and it was through your page, Just One Mixed Girl, and we were doing like a little bit of research and stuff, and we saw that your first post, I don't know if you've archived some, but we saw that your first post was posted on Blackout Tuesday,
Yes.
And we were wondering if, you know, what's been going on in the world at the moment, and the Black Lives Matter movement, was that something that inspired you to set up the page? Was it something that you'd kind of been thinking about beforehand, and then this happened and it was like the catalyst, or what was kind of the motivation behind it?
So actually, when I was in America, I remember when I was working on cases, I was like, oh, I really feel like I should do something and talk about the cases that I'm working on, and talk about the issues with like the death penalty and the injustice that happen in the US as a result of the death penalty. So I was writing down loads of ideas when I was in America about stuff like that. And one of the main motivations for doing that was because of the racial injustices in particular when it comes to the death penalty. So I thought about it before, but essentially did not find the courage to like go out and actually do it. So I had like loads of notes, but never actually did anything. And then this happened, and I started talking on my like personal page a lot about it, and I was getting a lot of like positive feedback from friends, being like, oh, thanks for recommendations, and oh, just read this that you shared. And I was like, oh, I should just do a separate page which is public and just talking about that, and then keep my like personal page more about my life. But I haven't really stuck to that. I've been continuing to share the same things on my personal page.
It's quite difficult to find the divide, isn't it? Because obviously when it's something that you're so passionate about, it kind of comes a part of your personal life anyway.
Yeah, because like literally everything I do is about like justice and wanting like an accountability. So I do try and share like positive things about my personal life, but a lot of the time it is more the social justice issues that I'm passionate about. I've just become both things. It's just one page is like public to everyone rather than just friends.
Yeah, that makes sense. Amazing. Awesome.
Hi. So, as Naima said, your Instagram page is a big part of your social justice, and you picked the name Just One Mixed Girl. Why did you pick this name?
I think I wanted to I wanted to show that I was mixed race, because I think something that I haven't really touched on yet on my page is I think there's quite a unique experience that mixed race people might go through that potentially Black people and white people aren't aware of. So I wanted to be like, you know, I'm mixed race, and I want to eventually talk about my experience being mixed rather than just being a person of colour. And just that I was just one person. I think I just wanted to like not try to be like the voice for all Black people or mixed race people or all people of colour. I just wanted to be like, look, it's just me giving my opinions and my experience. This is not to be said that this is everyone's experience, but it's just me trying to share what I went through. So that's kind of like why I went for Just One Mixed Girl.
It's really interesting that you said that as well, because I think sometimes Black people, people of colour, if they're in a room where they are a minority, which is often a lot of the time in the UK, they do like automatically almost have to represent for their entire race by default. So it's really cool that you've said like, actually, like this is just my experience, please don't like make it so that I'm now the voice of all mixed races.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something I was actually watching The Last Dance on Netflix about Michael Jordan.
Great documentary.
So good. And one thing that it highlighted to me, which is an aspect of white privilege I'd never considered before, was that actually as a white person, if you have success in whatever area, that is attributed to you alone. Whereas like if a Black person has that level of success, or any person of colour, it's like a success for them, obviously, but it's also like a success for the community. Like the whole community is behind them. But then there's also that added expectation or responsibility that you feel that you have to therefore then represent that community. So I think they spoke about how he didn't publicly come out in this political race for the Senate, where the first Black guy, I think it was in North Carolina, was trying to get a seat, and he didn't publicly say anything, but did behind the scenes donate to his campaign. And like everyone was so disappointed that he didn't come out and say, you know, vote for the Black candidate. But then I was like, yeah, it does feel disappointing, but at the same time, a white person wouldn't have had that expectation to come out politically if they weren't in that political sphere. I mean, he plays basketball. Yes, he'll have political views, but he doesn't necessarily want that to be what he's about. And I think that's something that I picked up on, was actually maybe we should try and not place too much pressure on people of colour that do have like, I guess, influence or have had success, to make them the voice of the community, because white people don't have that same pressure.
This
So
is
true.
what happened with Dizzy Rascal. I don't know if anyone else was thinking of that when he was on Great Morning Britain.
Oh yeah.
And Piers had kind of like asked him to speak on the fact that I think it was in Burnley, someone had hired a plane to write White Lives Matter, like over the thing, and then like Piers, Dizzy Rascal was on Great Morning Britain just to talk about the fact that he's going to be doing like a drive-in concert over summer, and he just was there to talk about music. It was like 8 a.m. in the morning, and then Piers wants to ask him to start talking about Black Lives Matter, and Dizzy's just like, why are you asking me that? Am I the spokesperson for black people now? Is it because my hair's nappy? And it was really funny. It was really entertaining.
Aggressive at the end of it though. He still got called aggressive by Piers at the end of it.
Oh gosh, I haven't seen that actually, but yeah, that's a prime example that you can't just go and promote what you're doing. You have to therefore then promote the Black Lives Matter campaign.
You can't just be a person. You're a person of color, and you kind of represent everyone.
I think our communities, we get very invested in our role models, and like even with, let's say, Barack Obama, everyone was rooting for him, and it was like, go on, like show them what we're about. And he had so much pressure on him, and obviously he made mistakes, but I think like you said, we put a lot of pressure on them to represent us all, but it doesn't have to be the case.
I think the only solution to this is to have more representation, so we don't feel like we need to put so much pressure on these individuals. If we are very well represented, such as white people in power, we don't have to feel the need to support them in everything they do. They're just another person in that position, in that role.
Yeah, no, that's true, because, and also we can just rely on people, for example, that have gone into politics or social justice issues to be that voice, rather than anyone that's had any success in any arena, whether it's music or whatever, to have to be able to then speak to these massive, complex and nuanced issues that they might not feel qualified to talk about.
Like you force people, celebrities who, like Louise said, and that's not their arena, to make these statements, and then social media then cusses them for making these statements that aren't quote unquote politically correct, or like not doing more. So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. And I think often like it's both the community themselves and also like external people just getting at them. So it's literally like, do I stay quiet? Do I talk? And if I talk, like, why should I have to speak for everyone? Because it's a very big responsibility to carry. And, you know, again, it's like Louise mentioned, it's a privilege that white people just don't have. Because when you're a judge and you're white, you're just a judge. But if you're a black judge, that scrutiny, why did, you know, even though he was like, for example, I think with the Meek Mill case, where the female judge, I think she gave him like longer sentence, and it was like, how could she do him like that, even though, you know, he's one of us, and why couldn't she just be a judge? Why did she have to be scrutinized? Like, I'd rather you focus on the fact that, you know, maybe the sentencing was harsh on its own, as opposed to the fact that she was a black judge giving this quote unquote harsh sentence. Like, it's just a lot to carry, and that then makes you almost like, people shy away from that. So you're not even allowed to be a person, and there's a lot of like dehumanizing facts. Like even with Kanye, he's not just a man going through a mental illness, he's a black man going through a mental illness. And again, even there you can't have that experience, which is really interesting. That kind of leads me to the next point that I wanted to touch upon, like because you grew up in a predominantly, I could be wrong, like almost a white area. And how was that growing up? But like, do you feel like the UK has changed now to when you were younger, or is it a systemic thing that will take longer than 25 years?
So yeah, as you said, my area is predominantly white, and it almost seems like an understatement to say it's predominantly white, because when I look at my school photos that I was in reception on the front row, and it was like a whole school photo, I was the only person, not only the only person of black descent, but the only person that was not white. There wasn't anyone else like that.
The whole school?
Like my whole school at primary school. When I started in reception, I was the only person that was not white. All the staff are white, all the students are white. There's just me on the front row, like.
Oh my gosh!
I didn't have anyone else that wasn't white, and I think I was talking to my parents about this the other day. Actually, I was like, because I grew up before going to school in a mixed race family, so I've got a white side of my family and a black side. I was so used to seeing so many colours in my family, different colours of skin, that it just didn't faze me either way. If I walked into a predominantly black room or a predominantly white room, it was just, at that age, it doesn't mean anything. So when I started school, I don't think I was fazed by it. But then when I was like 5 or 6 years old, so it must have been year 1, I think it was, I started getting racially bullied. So I had a couple of people telling me I looked like poo, or I looked like I just come out of a mud bath. And then I used to get notes in my book bag, and my parents found one that said all black people should be killed. Left in my book bag, written by like a 5 or 6 year old. So yeah, that was like the first time I was like, whoa, okay, like racism's clearly a thing. Obviously I didn't know how to articulate it at the age of 5 or 6, and I used to just go home crying to my mum, being like, I wish I was white, or I wish I had straight hair, and just essentially wanted to just blend in because that's what everyone else looked like that was around me. But luckily the head teacher at that school had quite a lot of experience in inner city schools where it was much more diverse, so he was on it in terms of dealing with it. Like, he spoke to all the perpetrators, he spoke to me individually, and after that I didn't have any like overt racial bullying ever again at that school. But I remember even being as like a 5-6 year old being spoken to by the head teacher. I remember being sat there like, oh, I've really kicked up a fuss now and it's going to make it worse, like, and I was only 5 and 6, like I was very
aware,
made it worse. So I think that was tough to go through, and you have like a lot of it sticks with you because you just always think it's the otherness, it's like you're always going to be different. So I've grown up being used to being different, and I think that has helped me in terms of confidence. I've had to get self-esteem and have those self-esteem crises a lot younger than most people. I think everyone had it in their adolescence, whereas I had it at the age of 5 or 6 and had to like learn to love who I was and be proud of who I was. But I think it has helped me career-wise, because growing up in a predominantly white area, now I'm pursuing careers where it's predominantly white and predominantly male. I'm not necessarily as intimidated as someone else who wouldn't have grown up in a predominantly white area when I walk into an interview room and the whole panel's white. Like, I've never been interviewed by a black person or person of colour.
Same.
So, like, if you're someone that has grown up in a very diverse area and you walk in and see that panel, even without realising, you might be unconsciously like, there's no one that looks like me here, and that can play on your mind and maybe ruin kind of the whole interview if you start to doubt yourself. So I think it has helped, but I've definitely, I've been bullied. Microaggressions were just something that I just thought was part of everyday life. Like the assumptions that I could sing, or that I was really good at sport or really fast. Stuff about like, oh, how do you kiss with those lips? And I'm like, normally.
So ridiculous.
I was going to say something, but it's probably not politically correct.
Go for it.
I was going to say, how do you kiss with yours?
Yeah. Such a stupid question. It was like, also probably like, what was I, like 17? I probably like kissed one person. I was like, well, I managed it. I don't really know. I'm not sure if my technique's on point yet, but just know like little things. Actually, the worst one was when I was 17 or 18 at a Halloween party, and 2 boys came up dressed as the KKK. And I remember looking at them, and I was like, you know, me just so I was so shocked, and I started crying. And I didn't know why I was crying, because I was like, I know it's not. But they were like so embarrassed and were so apologetic, and they obviously just thought it would be relatively funny. And I was like, if I wasn't there though, if I wasn't, you know, the only person of colour at that party, so I was the only one that actually had like an emotional reaction to that. If I wasn't there, would anyone have said anything? That's like my biggest question. Like, would it have just been like this funny thing if I wasn't there? Or was it because I was there, it became like, oh, probably shouldn't have done that? So yeah, I've had like a few, it comes with its challenges, but I think it might have benefited me in the long run. It wasn't easy necessarily.
And like Shree was saying then, how do you think that those sort of experiences compare to your experiences now? Do you feel like, maybe because obviously you said you moved to London, which is a bit more diverse, because that could be a difference in itself. Do you feel like your community has changed much? Do you feel like there'll still be young girls like yourself in going to those sort of primary schools and secondary schools that will have the similar sort of experiences, or do you think it will be a lot better now?
I love London. I think I love London because of its diversity. I think it just feels more, not like home, but I just feel very comfortable with like the multiculturalism that is London. I have seen that my area, so Stamford, has got slightly more diverse. Like I've seen more Black people and other people of colour living in Stamford, and I was like, oh, where were they when I was growing up? You know, so it's getting more diverse. I think. So I'm now like a chair of the Stamford Anti-Racism group that's been set up in like recently. And from what I can see of parents of like mixed race children, Black children, other people of colour, they're having similar experiences in Stamford. I don't think it's necessarily improved at all. I just think, like with everything, I think it just takes a different form. It just like re-evolves itself. So if you can't say expletives anymore, like racial slurs are frowned upon, so they just find another way. Microaggressions become more of the forefront of like what you expect. It doesn't mean anything has necessarily changed in people's attitudes. But I'm seeing more of a positive change since Black Lives Matter has really taken grip since George Floyd's murder. I think a lot more of my white friends and just white people are like, oh, we have to do something. Like it's our problem as well. And I think that's also why I started the page, is because I know so many white people that if they were educated on these issues would be such great allies. And I think that's the first step, is like them learning how to spot racism, because I don't think they necessarily spot it as well as we do. As people of colour, like you just have an instinct when something happens, whether whether it's because you're a woman or whether it's because of your race, or both. So I think they just have to start trusting you, that you have the instinct. I know when it's just someone that doesn't like me. I know when it's something more malicious. So yeah, I think people are starting to realise it's everyone's problem and everyone has something to do. And a lot of the parents that I've been speaking to have been trying to find children's books that are more representative and talk to their children about it in an age-appropriate way. So I think that's positive. So I'm hoping change is coming. I don't know if I think it's happened, but I'm hoping it's coming.
It's on its way. Yeah.
Definitely. Where we grew up, it was quite diverse, I would say. But I think like for me personally, I went to a school that was predominantly like white and Asian people, and it was just like me and two other Black girls. But I think where we lived in Reading, there were quite a few Black people, quite a few mixed race people, and for us, like mixed race people were kind of praised, and then it was like the Black people getting the brunt of the abuse and all of that from like fellow Black people, not just white people and stuff. It was a lot of the time it was like Black guys that were kind of abusing us. Yeah, it was quite different. And one of our questions to you was going to be, do you think you've had any like privilege because of your skin color? But obviously where you've grown up, it was the complete opposite. But do you think in your adult life maybe you've had, or just from seeing like the media and stuff, do you think you kind of have any sort of privilege because you're mixed race compared to like
yeah. Oh, definitely. I think that's something I realized when I moved to London, the whole light skin privilege in colorism, because I wasn't obviously aware of it in a white area, and my university was predominantly white. Newcastle's not that diverse as a university. I mean, it's more diverse than Stanford, but not for a university. So I've definitely noticed it in London. For example, like even like being chatted up, like people calling me a lighty. Never had heard that before. I was like, what?
Wow, that's such a big compliment. Like
I don't know what that is. So I was like, it's offensive, I don't get it. So no, I've definitely seen it in terms of like, it's almost not fetishized, but you're praised for being light skinned. And I did date a Black guy that was quite dark skinned, and he used to always be like, I wish I was more light skinned like my sisters. And I was like, I just never had come across it. So I think, yeah, it was definitely when I was older that I came across kind of light skin privilege. And I think the other main privilege that I've had is that my name doesn't sound black, quote unquote, whatever that means. So Louise Thompson, when I apply for jobs, my CV, they don't know that I'm a mixed race person or a person of colour until I walk through that first door into the interview. So I think that's helped, because I think we see a lot of unconscious bias in the hiring process, especially, what's it, something like white sounding names get 76% more responses or something like that. So having a white sounding name, I think, is the privilege that, in terms of my career, I think has definitely helped me, because, and even because I've had telephone interviews and I've been told many a time that I sound white, whatever that means. So they don't even know at that stage that I'm a person of colour. So it's literally at the last stage, final round of face-to-face interviews, that are like, oh, and you sometimes can see the shock, like the especially from a Louise Thompson.
Yeah, when you look behind you, Louise, is that you?
And I watched Famalam. Have you seen that show, that comedy show on BBC, Famalam? And there was like this sketch of
it's so funny.
Yeah, it's really funny. And there was a sketch at the end. I think it was like there were last two people on Earth, a man and a woman. And I think, and they were like, the black man wanted to check there were no white people still around, like white women. So he started shouting white names. He was like, Becky, Louise. And I was like, hey, there are Louises that are not white. So Louise apparently is a stereotypical white name, even though I'm named after my black great grandmother who was also called Louise. So, but yeah, I think the white sounding name, and I've definitely come across light skin privilege when I came to London. I wasn't aware of it before, but I remember Lighty and loving the fact that someone's like mixed race is something that I've only experienced since I've come to London. I think it's great. I think it's just, well, it's internalized racism, isn't it? We celebrate the lighter skin because
the closer you are to white.
And colonization as well, I think, for sure. Like, even in South Asian cultures, calling somebody fair is actually the biggest compliment. Like, they will use it in a series of compliments. They'll be like, she's fair, she's educated. And it's like, how dare you? What does that mean? Because growing up, I thought I was really dark. So that was definitely a thing that you see all the time.
Every culture, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's something we as a community need to work on, is like acknowledging how we've internalized that and how we should counteract that, because I personally find dark skin so beautiful. I always wanted to be darker, and like I'll literally be tanning on holiday like a white person trying to get dark.
See, that's so crazy, because I remember growing up and being like scared of the sun. Can't get too dark because then you're gonna get like cussed out by these black boys.
That's crazy, and the fact that it's black boys as well, like it's insane. But no, I literally like sunbathe because I like being slightly darker. I hate my winter skin tone, I used to say.
I have a question. Did anybody ever come up to you, like a white person, and compare their skin in the summer and be like, I'm almost as dark as you?
I feel like every person in the UK who was of colour has experienced that.
Almost as dark as you. Okay. All right.
That is something I think I experienced all the time growing up in a white area. Like they would come back from the summer holidays, be like, look.
Oh gosh.
When they
and they come back with cornrows as well. They come back with their hair and cornrows and the beads at the end from their Jamaican holiday.
That's so funny. Or sports day, you know, the ones that I got the most was during sports day when it was hot and we've been outside all like just one day, and they'd be like, look, I'm almost as dark as you. And you just say, oh yeah.
The irony is I tan a lot faster than them anyway, so I'm like, no, I'm tan.
Darker.
I am no longer the skin tone I started at either. No, all the time. Or if they like fake tanned, they'd be like, oh, I was like, don't offend me by pretending that orange look is anywhere near my skin.
It's really not.
They don't all look orange, it just can come out.
Sometimes.
Disclaimer. We're not against fake tanning.
At one party, at one sleepover, they put fake tan on my stomach. We were like, oh, let's see how close it is. And I was like, totally like, yeah, let's do it. And I look back and like, that was weird. And then I just was stuck with this like orange splodge on my stomach for days. And I was like, yeah, it's not giving you my skin tone at all. No.
The same. So like, speaking of that, obviously, you know, you're half black, half white, Scottish and Guyanese. Did you ever feel like, not, I don't want to say crisis, but I can't, for lack of a better word, did you ever feel like you went through a bit of an identity crisis, or that you had to like pick a side? Or have you ever been in a room where you feel like, because I feel like sometimes from accounts that I've had from mixed race people, like my mum's actually mixed race, and she was saying like sometimes it's like, oh, in one place you're not black enough, and in another place you're not white enough, and you're kind of like caught in the middle. Did you ever feel like you had to pick a side, or that one side was more harsh on you than another? If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I've definitely had like, oh, you're not black, and but I'm not white. So it was definitely like I wasn't part of either community necessarily. And my response to people saying I'm not black, I was always like, well, if there was a slave trade, I'd be a slave.
Yeah, that is so true.
Very true.
Right. I think so I probably identify more as black, but then again, like, I'm just as black as I am white, and the reason I identify more with black is because white people would put me that way.
Yeah.
If I identified as white, I think I'd be put in a mental institute. They would think terribly wrong with me, like psychologically. Just as white as I am black. And in terms of like the cultures, like a lot of, I think I've had so many, because my influences as well, I think it can depend. If you've had a positive influence on one side and a negative one, then you probably relate to one side more than the other. But I have positive influences from both. And the great thing about my white side of the family is that I never felt any like lack of acceptance. It was always just, that's my cousin, that's my granddaughter, whatever it was. It wasn't ever. So I was very lucky in the sense that both sides have had a positive influence. Therefore, I wouldn't now identify with more of one than the other. Like, I'll go Scottish dancing and then I'll be, you know,
That's amazing.
The next week. So like, yeah, I relate to both. I think in terms of like the community that struggles more is obviously the black side. So I feel like I need to be more vocal about, you know, Black Lives Matter and issues that happen in terms of racial injustices, because they're the side that's struggling. And I remember once being in a debate with someone, they were like, you do realize you're half white as well? And I was like, yes. And if it was the white side that was struggling, I'd be standing up for them. Like, it's just, you're not struggling. So I'm not going to go like white lives matter, because they do.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't identify with one more, but I think probably because I talk about racial injustice more, people will probably think I identify more with the black side of my family. But actually, it's pretty much half and half, like, because I've had great relationships with both sides.
I can definitely relate to what you've said as well, because like sometimes like my nan, she's Irish, so she's like fully white, and sometimes like obviously I'll be really vocal on these things. She's like, you know, you have a white nan, you know. And I'm like, yeah, nan, like, I know. Like, or like, she'll say to my mum, like, your mother is white. And it's like, we know, but like, it's like what you said, people won't identify, like, especially me, obviously, because I don't look even an ounce white. So from the outside looking in, for me to try and now scream about my white side doesn't, to me, make any logical sense, because when it comes to being like racially profiled or like stereotyped, no one's looking at what part of my makeup is white or black. They're just seeing skin color. And I think that's a struggle for a lot of people who are mixed, is if you look a certain way, no one's trying to like investigate what other cultures you could be and like what you're made up of. It's literally just, well, you're dark, so you're black, or you're darker than white, so you're black.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I find that actually, I think obviously people that are friends with me understand my mixed race, but I find that I think white society in general can't see, oh, that's a mixed race person, that's a black person, the same way we probably could. I can definitely be like, they look a bit mixed, or, you know, but I don't think they see that in me. I don't think they look at me and think you're mixed. I think they look at me and think you're black.
Yeah, and your childhood experiences actually speak to that even more.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember there was one time I was playing netball, and like no one assumes my dad is my dad, so my dad is white. And like I was playing netball and he was watching, and one of the teachers was just chatting to him, and she ended up chatting about me, being like, oh, like Louise is having a good game, whatever it was. And then like after like 5 minutes of chatting about me, she was like, so who's your daughter? And he was like, Louise. He was like, and he totally thought she was talking to him about me because she knew that. He was like, no, like, yeah, Louise is my daughter. So there's that whole, and if I go out with my dad, just out for lunch here, like the whole room are like trying to assess how we know each, like what our relationship is, because they're like, how are they, like, because they look close, but no, like they just can't work it out. Like the stares we get just from being together, people don't understand what mixed race is. And I think I was watching, is it called The Midwife, the old set back at wartime? There was this woman that was that was having a baby with a black man, and she was married to a white man and was scared. Was scared. She didn't know what race the baby would be, essentially, and she was scared of the result of the birth, because then if it comes out mixed, then the husband knows that she's obviously cheated. And this baby came out mixed. It was the darkest baby I've ever seen in my entire life. I was literally there like, a white woman could not produce a baby that dark from the womb. Like
even black women can't. Babies are born so pale.
This is what I was thinking. I was like, this is the darkest newborn I've ever seen in the entire world, and that's supposedly come out of a white woman. I was like, that's just not the way mixed race works. It was just this really black baby, beautiful baby, but I was like, she would not have produced that child at all. Like, I was very pale, and my mum said she got a lot of looks from people being like, you sure that's your child? They just don't understand what, first of all, that black children don't come out really dark anyway, let alone mixed race children. So yeah, there's just a total misunderstanding of what mixed race is, how they look, to the point where you can see it on TV and it's like, that woman would not have produced that baby. So no, it is interesting.
Very interesting.
I got a quick follow-up question based on what you've just said. For example, going out with your dad, they'll be working out the type of relationship you've had, or they don't really see you as white. Why do you think people only see you as black but not as white?
Good question. I think because we live in a world that's quite binary, and you see that kind of everywhere. So you're either black or you're white. There's no nuance, even though mixed race people have been around for centuries. They still just put you in. There's always been, like, if you look at segregation in America, it was always white, coloured. We all get lumped together kind of as a group. Like sometimes if I was the only black person in my year, someone would be like, no, there was that girl Tara. I was like, she was South Asian, like like everyone gets lumped together. It's almost like white and everything else, let alone white or black. So I think it's just a total lack of understanding and our like obsession with binaries, that you're either one or the other. You can't be mixed.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's why.
Just to go off on a tangent now, I've got a question because obviously you study law, and you're really a social, you're looking for justice, you've done it in the UK and US. What is the difference between the US and the UK legal system? Some main differences between them?
Gosh, that's a big question. So I think they're both based on the same principles, kind of the whole like innocent until proven guilty, jury trials when there's serious criminal offences. So there's a lot of similarities, but I think the main differences are that legal professionals, or like the senior legal professionals, are elected. So there's like a political influence in their criminal justice system. So there's a reason for them to kind of want to have high conviction rates so they get re-elected, whereas you wouldn't have that here. There's no, like, judges are appointed. I and lawyers are, you know, just employed. Like there's no vote on who should be the head of the Crown Prosecution Service here, whereas you have the equivalent with the Attorney General over there, and they're elected and judges are elected. So I think that really impacts the whole idea of the separation of powers. I think if they had judges that were appointed and there was no political incentive, I think that would improve their criminal justice system a lot. I mean, it wouldn't be perfect because ours isn't perfect, but I think that's the major thing that I noticed was like they've got political incentives to try and convict this person of this crime. If they solve this big crime or be seen to solve it, then they'll get elected again. So that's why they have a lot of incentive to convict almost as soon as possible. And I think someone did tell me that when you see it's coming up to re-election, you'll see them being harsher and higher conviction rates. So I think that's a big influence. And then the other big difference is because they've got they've got different states, so different states have different
laws,
slightly different laws and
Yeah.
different processes, and then they have obviously the federal level as well. So that's quite hard to get your head around. It's almost like each state is a different country because you've got to learn the law of that state to be able to practice in that state. So yeah, that's a big difference, is that there'll be different approaches in different states. Like, for example, not all of the states have the death penalty. It's only a few. Some have abolished it. Some are saying that they're not going to execute anyone for X number of years. So they all have different approaches to it. And then you have like the states that are really committed to the death penalty. So yeah, I think those are the two biggest differences, is the political influence in the US criminal justice system, and also the fact that the states are almost individual countries in terms of their laws can all be different.
Do you think though, just quickly
Okay.
on that, because what you've said about obviously the fact that they get elected, so there's a political influence, you've obviously seen that straight away as like it's not a positive thing because it means that people are being harsher on convictions and stuff like that. Do you think that just goes to show what the people who are voting are like though? Because I remember I watched a documentary, I don't know if you guys have seen it or heard of it, it's called 16 Shots, and it's about this young black boy called Laquan McDonald, who actually got shot 16 times by this police officer. It's absolutely insane. Like when you see the video, you're just like, how could this even be left down to like any sort of interpretation? Like it was an execution. But this whole documentary kind of uncovers what happens afterwards. And the district attorney obviously is elected, and they can go after different police officers and stuff like that. And like this massive Black Lives Matter movement basically got her out of office and out of being a district attorney. And then a black woman came in, and she was obviously she was in the documentary as well, and she was talking about that experience also. And the reason why I mention this, to bring this up, is like, do you feel like almost it depends on what I guess the public are like? Because if you've got a community who can vote a district attorney in and vote a judge in that are for criminal justice, then maybe those people wouldn't be harsher on convictions to get re-elected, if that makes sense. But the fact that obviously the people who are voting clearly want to be tough on crime, this rhetoric that has been around since bloody Ronald Reagan, it's like now that's like the go-to almost to get elected in any sort of position of power in America, which is crazy.
Yeah, no, I think it would be positive if the electorate assessed success in the criminal justice system in a different way. So I think the issue is that most people would be like, we've got a successful criminal justice system. If we're solving crimes at a really high rate and convicting people at a high rate, that means we're doing really well. When actually the measure should be, are we convicting the right people? Because there's no point just having a conviction for no reason. So I think if the measure and the way people thought of success in that arena changed, then we could have like some positive elections with people that are actually pursuing justice in terms of actually holding people to account, rather than just saying, if we solve this crime quickly, we'll look like. It's like they just, because politics is always about appearances, they need to appear like they're doing something, they need to appear that they're being really successful. That forces them to pursue convictions that aren't necessarily accurate, and that's how you end up with wrongful convictions. So if people are better educated on how to assess success when it comes to criminal justice, then I think they might start electing the right people. But that's quite a big task, I think. I don't think people understand, the importance of it can take time sometimes. to solve a crime, to make sure that you get the right person.
Yeah, just going off of that, like I totally agree with you that the measure is broken, because surely a good criminal justice system is one where, like, crime shouldn't always be, justice shouldn't always be about apprehending or, like, you know, punishing. It should be about preventing to begin with. Surely a good justice system is one where crime is reduced as opposed to more criminals are caught. You should be creating less criminals because it's a result of poverty, inequity. It's a lot of systemic issues as opposed to just, like, of course you have, like, you know, pockets of people who are actually, like, they have, for whatever reason, issues, and they, you know, their serial killings, all of that kind of stuff, mass murders. But actual systemic crime, like drug dealings or like whatever else it might be, is a result of poverty, lack of education, inequity, where they think crime is the only reason. So I'm like a really big advocate of prison reform. Like, I don't think prison should be a thing. Like, I don't believe in that. So I just wanted to just ask you guys, like all of you, and mainly Louise, like, just what are your personal thoughts on, you know, justice reform and like death penalty or, you know, prison reform?
So I'm totally with you. I think the other thing that people need to realise is that the criminal justice system and policing come after the fact. The crime's already been committed. Policing and the criminal justice system don't prevent the crime from happening in the first place, and I think that's where our energy should be, is crime prevention rather than coming in after the fact and punishing. And then I think the next step is, if you are coming in after the fact, then we should actually be focusing on rehabilitation rather than just putting them. What I don't get about prisons is we're putting criminals away altogether so that their network is now other criminals.
Who's stronger?
They've made friends with criminals, and then we release them. They have lower job prospects. It's going to be harder for them to even pursue a career, even if they have been rehabilitated, and therefore they're going to resort to crime. I think it's shown actually in the UK that in instances where we've given what they call community sentences rather than prison sentences, there's a lower rate of reoffending, which shows that putting people in prison in terms of preventing them from reoffending isn't that successful. And I think there have been people trying to get rid of prison sentences that are less than 6 months, because all it does is just uproot this person. They lose their house, their job and everything. Whereas if you give them a community sentence, which they do community volunteer work around their job that they might have already, that means they can still pay the bills, they've still got a house. And if it's, you know, if you find, for example, as a lawyer, look and say, like, look, it's clear that he has an alcohol issue because all of his crimes were committed when he was drunk, so let's get him on an alcohol rehabilitation course as well, so that he can improve his relationship with alcohol and things like that. I think that's much more effective in terms of preventing crime happening again than just throwing people in these prisons and just hoping after, what, like 7 years they'll come out and be fine. It's just, it doesn't make sense to me. So yeah, I think we need to know that policing in prisons comes after the fact. It doesn't do anything to prevent it happening in the first place, which is what the focus should be.
No, I completely agree with you, because all you're doing, like, I think the way I see it, prisons are mostly, it's a school for crime. Because when you go in there, you're dehumanized. You're not even called your number. You're called, like, your name. Sorry, you're given a number, and it strips you away from everything. And if you actually think about the concept, you're locking them away without any therapy, without, you know, because it might be trauma that caused them to commit a crime, or it might be like lack of education. If there's no route for that, if there's no route for them to actually prepare them for the life after prison, it's just punishment for the sake of punishment. And often it's the minority and people without wealth that are targeted. And if prisoners can't vote, and if, you know, prisons are made up of, like in America especially, the population is mostly black, it's redesigned slavery, because it's private prisons now, and you're actually making them work for lower cost. You're making them make furniture, making them make clothes, or whatever it might be. So you haven't abolished slavery, you just redesigned it and you've given it a new name, and it's a prison system now. And that's all you've done. And the 3-strike rule, like, where if you commit a crime, that's it. Like, even if it's a small, like, petty misdemeanor and it's a felony, that's it. You go to prison for life. You're killing people, basically.
Yeah, and you asked about the death penalty. I have a stance where even I'm totally against the death penalty in all circumstances. I don't believe in it. I think the death penalty, actually, now that I've looked and worked on it, it seems like, so I met people on death row, obviously. I've not met someone or even studied about someone that's committed the crime of murder and is now on death row that had like this idyllic childhood. They've all had horrific childhoods, and they need as much support to overcome that as anyone else, but they were never given it, and they're poor and disadvantaged. There's no like rich person on death row, because you don't get sentenced to death. So the way I see it is they're just kind of, it's almost like society killing off the people they failed, because we failed them as children because we didn't protect them from whatever happened to them. And then we're like, but now you killed someone, even though that was kind of our fault because we didn't help you during your childhood, we're now going to kill you. It just doesn't make sense to me. And as you said, yeah, death row is, Black people are horrifically overrepresented on death row, but actually the main determiner of whether you get the death sentence is the race of the victim. So if the race of the victim is white, I think it's something like you're 4 times more likely to get the death penalty than if the race of the victim is Black. And then if you look at like interracial crimes, so where the murderer is white and the victim was Black, there's been 21 white people that have been sent to death row for killing a Black person since 1976. So in like 44 years, there's only been 21 white people sentenced to death for killing a Black person. Whereas if you look at it the other way, since 1976, there's been 295 Black people sentenced to death for killing white people.
That's insane. Just out of interest, because I know a lot of people who love to undermine statistics and undermine the facts at hand that there is definitely racial inequality in the justice system. Out of interest, do you know what the difference in numbers of crime there was? Because like I feel like some people would say, well, the reason why only 21 white people were sent to death row is because they just don't commit that much crime against Black people. So do you know that? Do you know if the numbers are similar in terms of?
I don't know, but I think when you talk about death row, the crime is murder. Like it's the most serious crime. So even if they're a white person, they've still killed someone. And yet for the same crime, Black people, well, for the same crime against Black people, it's not. That's why Black Lives Matter exists, because it just shows that they don't care as much if the victim is Black. If the person is killed as Black, you're less likely to get death row. And that statistics that's used by a lot of the organisations campaigning against the death penalty. And like another interesting statistics with death row is like exoneration. So people that have been convicted and sentenced to death are now released because they've been proven innocent. And I think there's been like 170 exonerations since maybe 1974, 1976, and 89 of those people were Black. So the vast majority of the exonerations were Black people being freed from death row, which shows that a lot of Black people are wrongfully convicted for the worst crime, and we sentence them to death even though they were innocent. But yeah, the death row statistics are crazy, and I had to do a lot of training before I went out to America to learn about the American criminal justice system and kind of stats about death row. And it is truly shocking. And actually what a lot of people aren't aware of is, I think for 4 years in the 70s, the death row was abolished in America by the Supreme Court because it was shown to be injustice in the sense that Black people and ethnic minorities were more likely to get the death sentence. And then so it was proven then that that was an issue in the 70s, let alone now it's still an issue, but we still have it for some reason. They brought it back because they said, okay, we've got this framework that means only people that commit the worst murders will be on death row, but we're still seeing the same racial disparities, which shows we didn't really solve the issue in the first place, but it's back, unfortunately.
Can I ask you a question about your time working on death row?
Yeah.
How did you mentally cope with this? You said that you've talked to some of the people on death row, got to know about them and their childhoods and how the country failed them, how we failed them as during their childhood. But how did you feel mentally after hearing all of this and having this perspective?
Yeah, it was emotionally draining. I think one of the positives is the cases that I'm working on, there was no execution dates, like it's still quite far off because it takes ages to get to that point. I think the cases that I'm working on, the murders happened in the 1980s and 1990s. So they've been on death row for like 30 years, these people, and we're still going through all the appeals that we can. I don't really know how I dealt with it because I didn't have any like mechanisms, but I think I just found it rewarding that I was trying to help them, and I tried to focus on that rather than obviously focusing on, first of all, we have to read about the crime itself, which is horrific anyway, and then you have to read about their childhood or learn about their childhood, which is some of the worst I've ever heard. But I think meeting them helps because it put a face to the name and you got to know them as an individual beyond kind of the situation, I guess. We didn't just talk about their case, they talked about me, I talked about them. I think I had to learn to really switch off as soon as I left the office. I wasn't thinking about it anymore. But I did realise quite early on I'm going to have to, and I think I'm taking it away with my future career, because obviously it'd be emotionally draining, some of the stuff I do as a lawyer, is that I need to acknowledge, right, okay, I'm overwhelmed now, I'm going to take a week off and I'm just going to go home or go on holiday and just not think about it at all. And I think that's the best way to cope with it, is acknowledge when you need a break and focus on the fact that you're now trying to help, rather than focus on like obviously the horrific negatives that are part of it. And yeah, the public inquiry stuff I'm doing at the moment is also really emotionally draining, and it's the same thing. I just really need to acknowledge, like, okay, I need a break now. I need to go for a walk, whatever it is. Yeah, I think it's just acknowledging when you're going to get overwhelmed and what you need to do to switch off for a bit, which can be hard, but you just need to find the way that you do switch off.
Yeah, sounds like a lot.
No, it can be a lot, and like my parents always joke, they're like, oh, it's always fun having conversations about your work at the dinner table, because it's always really depressing. But no, I do find it really rewarding at the same time, so that's what I'm focused on, is like, you know, you're trying to help them now. So yeah, but the main issues in the UK that the main thing that annoys me the most is actually stop and search. I'm sure you guys are aware of like the horrific statistics, but I don't understand why it exists, because it's so unsuccessful. Like, we barely, like the vast majority, there's no further action, let alone the ones that go on to a conviction, because further action could mean like anything from like maybe getting arrested and then being released because they realise there's nothing, or like getting charged, still could be found not guilty. So I imagine the conviction rates for stop and search are so low, and yet we waste so much time stopping and searching young black males in particular for no reason. It's just a form of harassment, and I don't get why it exists, and I personally think it should be abolished. I'm hoping the case with that famous sprinter, now that he's bringing an actual lawsuit, I'm hoping that will highlight the need to just get rid of it, because it is just pointless, and it infuriates me to my core, because actually I think as a lawyer you come in at the point where they're potentially going to trial, well, as a barrister in particular, but what we've seen is that the vast majority of stop and searches don't go anywhere. So there's no point where I can get up in court and be like, the police officer should not have done X, Y, Z, because it never gets to that point. There's so like breaches of the police code of conduct that are never addressed, because it never gets to the point where we get to court and can address them, because they're just let go.
Yeah, it's just a waste of time. It's really interesting you said about the famous sprinter as well, because Dawn Butler, Labour MP, she literally just tweeted today that she got stopped by the Met Police and she recorded the whole incident. So I assume that will be coming out soon, and I'm intrigued to see what would have happened, why they stopped her. But it's just like, and people say like, this is why black people talk about respectability politics. It's like, doesn't matter what career you're in, doesn't matter what you do, until if they don't know you, they just see black. So it's like, you can't escape it. You could be a famous sprinter, you could be one of the most successful black people in the world, you could be a Labour MP and still get stopped by the police.
Yeah, it's insane. And that footballer that came out and was like, says he gets stopped all the time and asked if that car is his, and also on the train they checked his first class ticket but didn't check anyone else's. And it's so blatant. Everyone's like, oh, it's just really subtle. I was like, no, that's very much like in your face, like racial targeting and harassment. And the other thing about stop and search is that it's been shown that they're more likely to find drugs on white people than they are on black people, and yet they still search black people at a higher rate. I mean, you would have more success if you searched more white people. Yeah. Search more black people. Like,
Yeah.
you're still searching 25% of the young black population in a few months. Like, they just
Yeah, you'd rather be racist than be successful. That's what I'm hearing from that law, from every law. That's all I'm hearing. Because even the exoneration thing that you mentioned, Louise, that's terrible. So you're more likely to be black and innocent and yet be on death row. Like, that's crazy. So again, even that law, they'd rather be racist than be successful. I think with any systemic thing, we could actually be better, but they'd rather be racist. And it just makes no sense. To me, we could do better.
Louise,
just to
sorry,
oh, sorry, go on, Samia.
I got a quick question, because I know you started off with this saying that both the UK and the US justice system is innocent until proven guilty. And then you talk about the stop and search. Does this undermine our innocent until proven guilty, this whole stop and search? So does this undermine our whole justice system, just walking around saying, I think you're guilty, and so I'm going to search you like you are a criminal or you've committed a crime already?
Yeah, so yeah, they both are founded on the idea that you're innocent and proven guilty, but whether, I don't think either the UK or the US succeed really, because I think as soon as you're even arrested or charged, people are like, oh, they did it. Like, even before the trial, they've already decided they've done it, even though up until the point of like the verdict, you are technically innocent. And with stop and search, I mean, it just totally contradicts it, because if you even look at the accounts or the videos where the police will be like, oh, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, I'm just chilling with my friends. And they're like, yeah, are you though? And they're like, well, yeah. It's like, how can you prove you're just chilling with your friends? Like, that's trying to prove your innocence. You can't do it. You're not meant to be able to do it. And that's the reason we have the principle, is because it's so hard to prove that you're innocent. Like, if I was walking down the street and someone was like, where are you going? I was like, to the shop. And they were like, prove it. I would be like, I can't prove it. There's no way to prove that. Like, it's really hard to prove your innocence. And that's what stop and search does, because they essentially ask you a few questions and be like, I actually don't believe you, so I'm going to search you. So they're asking you to prove your innocence, which is really hard to do. And then because you can't prove your innocence, you're searched. So yeah, it totally undermines the innocent until proven guilty. And if you're getting stop and searched, there's obviously a lower level of suspicion than needed to arrest you. So there's obviously different levels. So you need to have X amount of evidence to be able to arrest someone and question them, and X amount of evidence to be able to charge them of that offence and take them to trial. So they're definitely they've not got enough evidence to reach that arrest level. So why are you bothering them? Like, you shouldn't be bothering them at all. You've got no evidence they've done anything wrong to be able to arrest them and question them, which isn't necessarily that high a barrier. So we've lowered it even further to be able to stop us. There's just no point. I just don't, it totally undermines it.
And yeah, Akala talks about actually that over criminalization of black boys makes the situation worse, especially in inner city London and communities like that. The response then to the police is far worse than it could be. So there definitely needs to be a lot of reform there. But just to kind of like wrap up, obviously you have so much knowledge. Like, this has been an amazing conversation. I'd actually love to speak to you again at some point, because I feel like I've learned so much just speaking to you. But obviously, like, you've set up this page, and I think now social media has become a big part of like actual social justice and also like spreading awareness. So what is like your ultimate goal with the page that you've created? What would success kind of look like, or what would you like to see to get out of what you're doing with your platform?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think when I started, it was mainly like education. So a lot of the stuff that I do, I obviously do my own posts, but I also try in my stories to highlight other accounts and share stuff that other people are sharing, or articles, just so that people are aware of who else they could be following. And I think that's my main thing, is to like educate people, to motivate them to the point where they take action. Like, for example, I have like an amazing friend who's very on it with all of these issues, and her company were doing Blackout Tuesday, so they're going to do the black tile thing. No, it wasn't Blackout Tuesday, whenever they were doing the tiles for the day, or whatever it was, And her company did it, and she messaged them like, okay, great that you've done that, but have you thought about donating any money to this cause? Like, it's great that you've done. And she literally just pressured like the CEO into like donating to Black Lives Matter and things like that. And that's the kind of action I think we need people to take. Is like, okay, we don't need the performative stuff anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually becoming part of your agenda. So I want you to look at your hiring practices. I want you to look into the criminal justice system and see how horrific it is and start talking about it with people and sharing petitions and campaigns. I want it to spur and inspire people into action. And even if that's like 1 or 2 people, I'd be so happy, because that's 1 or 2 more people than before. But I think the ultimate goal is to have more people proactively being anti-racist, rather than just sitting back and being like, oh, this is shocking, isn't it? Like, what are we gonna do? Like, do something is essentially what I'm trying to get people to do.
Yeah.
100%. That's amazing. I think we're all in absolute agreement when we say we are sick of performative social justice. So the fact that like that's like your main goal from your page, I think is absolutely amazing, because we definitely need more people to act and like act now.
Yeah,
for sure.
And I really believe in the radical, what seems radical. I think this is what everyone should think, that we can change the world one little bubble at a time. But that's how change happens. It's not an overnight thing. I think people often see things changing and they're like, okay, well, that happened, you know. But I think that takes many back end hours, and it takes many people willing to believe that they can change the world. So I really like, I am so in awe of all that you're doing, and I think you should continue that, because I think this is how we change the world. We need to do better than the generation before us to then encourage the generation after us to do better still. And that's how we get to this, what people like to call, oh, that's an ideal world. That's what we should be aiming for. Let's aim for that. We might end up somewhere in the middle, but let's aim for the ideal world.
I love what you guys are doing. Obviously, I followed you. I think we have like a mutual friend potentially that pointed. He was like, "Oh, you're like this page," because he saw that I set up my own. And I think if everyone just tries to make a little bit of a difference and make and like people used to ask me, "Oh, what's like your goal?" I think someone asked me this once, and I said, "Oh, I just want to make the world a little bit of a better place." And they were like, "Oh, really?" And I was like, "I don't really know how I'm going to do that, but that is the goal." And if I had that goal, I think the world would be a much better place.
100%. I think we should all clap for Louise.
Louise, you should also clap for yourself.
Great conversation. I think we've been able to like learn, and like obviously we really love having other people's perspectives on things, just learning about other people's lives, because we're all about coming together and talking, just literally talking and sharing experiences. So it's been really good.
Yeah, and thank you guys for having me, and thanks for what you're doing. I love seeing what you guys are doing. I've been listening, so yeah, keep it up. Essentially, I love it.
Thank you. And if you have any friends that you think would be good for this platform, or anyone that you think would like be able to tell their story, just give them a shout. I think that's literally what we're here for.
Yeah,
just providing a platform for voices. Yeah, we would love to have you back. Like, wow.
Yeah, I'm sure we can think of another topic.
Yeah, even probably focus on like women's issues, because I think
But yeah, just on that point, obviously to everyone who's watching and listening, if any of these topics that we've discussed today you have an opinion on, please make sure you're talking about it, you're sharing on Twitter, you're hashtagging This Is Untold. And if there's anything else that you'd like Louise to come back and speak to us about, share those opinions as well. That would be amazing. But thanks for listening, and thanks for watching, everyone.
Thank you.
And follow Just One Mixed Girl.
Follow. We will put the details in the details.
Yeah, we'll put
all the details for this for Louise's page in the descriptions. Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.